Hey Adventurers, so today is going to be another book review. This is going to be for The Knight by Gene Wolfe. This is book one of the Wizard Knight duology, both of which are contained in this omnibus, and so I'm going to hold this up because that's what I have to hold up. I could put a picture up, but I don't usually hold the book up if I have it to hold up. So I'm going to do that instead. This is a kind of a weird one to categorize genre-wise. It's high fantasy, very, very much high fantasy, but it's also like portal fantasy to some degree, or I don't, it's kind of really hard to describe, but it's very high and it's very enjoyable. A lot of mythological aspects to it as well, which are really interesting, the way that all ties into everything. So The Knight is the first part of the Wizard Knight duology by Gene Wolfe, which I already mentioned. This first book follows a boy as he becomes a man and is intent on becoming a knight. Okay, before I continue, really quickly, this duology is very, it's basically one book. The space between the two books, what happens in between the beginning or the end of book one and the beginning of book two is basically non-existent in terms of our perception. And so you really can read it as one book. And so this, by me saying that this first book follows a young boy as he becomes a man and is intent on becoming a knight, that's like the first half of the story. But then there's so much more to it as it goes, and that story, like, it doesn't end there. That's just a small piece of what's going on. So yeah, let's continue on though. It's not a terribly simple, like, sit down and read book, though it is absolutely enjoyable as a story. And what I mean by that is that it's, if you want to really deeply understand it and see what all Wolfe is doing with this book, you have to actually you have to think about it. You have to spend some time studying what he's saying, what the words are, or what is being implied by what is during what is happening and stuff like that. And you'll catch more if you do a reread of this book, which I haven't yet done. And if I do, it will be a while in the future, just due to me not having time and having so many other things to read at the moment. But if you really want to understand it, you'll have to do some thinking as you go and probably reread the book. I haven't yet reread it, so I basically have said all this. So I don't know if that will be able to happen anytime soon for me. So I really am just reviewing it for the story that it is, that is told and contained within this book, and not for anything deeper than that, because I'm not focused on that with the read that I did of this. It was very much a let's enjoy the story. Let's read the story first and foremost. Before we continue on with this review, I'd just quickly like to say welcome to an Erudite adventure. I'm T. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and we will continue right on in. So this starts with our main character, who's called Abel, waking up in Mythgarther. I doubt I'm pronouncing that right, but you'll have to just bear with me because I don't know how to pronounce it correctly. Something along those lines, though, and knowing that it is not his home, though he does not know why or how he has gotten here. It then proceeds to follow him as he starts learning about this world, and then very quickly getting himself in much deeper than he ever could or should, which is directly the catalyst for the rest of the story. And that's very intentionally blank, very intentionally vague with what I'm saying here, but it's. Once you look back on the story that was told here and how this story starts, the inciting incident, that's the writing terminology rather than catalyst. I just like the word catalyst. Anyways, the inciting incident for this story is really about this Abel getting himself into something that he shouldn't have gotten himself into. So Wolfe's world building is fascinating to me because it is simultaneously very familiar and completely strange. And you can really say that about a lot of books, but it particularly applies here for a couple of reasons. For one thing, we are on the human plane of existence, though it is not Earth. So we are very much on the human plane of existence. This Mythgarther is the human plane of existence. This is where the humans reside. This is where the humans live. This is their realm. For another, we have a lot of both Norse and Greek influences in terms of like Norse mythology and Greek mythology and stuff like that. The planes above and below the planes above and below, meaning above and below Mythgarther, are realms belonging to other races essentially, but those absolutely have influence on Mythgarther, as does Mythgarther on them, and the way that plays back and forth, and how one thing can affect the other, and this thing can affect in a different place and stuff like that. It's actually very interesting in the way that things penetrate between them. is very interesting to me. I enjoyed that quite a bit, even though that's one of the things that you have to think a little bit to wrap your head around. Of course, you learn more about this as you go, and then again, more about it in The Wizard, which is the second part of the duology. So a lot of how the interactions work will not really fully make sense until you can look back at the book as a whole. And I found that yesterday, as I was writing the review, I was looking back at this story and thinking, whoa, I understand so much more now. And just because I'd read both the books at that point, but I was also able to look back and see how the things from part 2 from the Wizard affected the things or explained the things in the Night and stuff like that. And so it was very interesting because you do get an understanding as you read, but it also helps to be able to look back and see it. I found that as dense and complicated as it can be, this is a fairly thick book, but as dense and complicated as it can be, it actually reads very quickly. I am a slow physical reader, but the first time I sat down to read this, I read a rather large chunk in a very short amount of time, and I was very pleasantly surprised by that. The main story is immensely enjoyable, just as a book. You just read the story for the story, and it's enjoyable, and the events that are unfolding. It's all very enjoyable to me. We really are seeing Abel grow, but we also see him develop into a leader and a knight. And we begin to understand why he was bestowed the title of Sir Abel of the High Heart, and how then he works to earn that title. Through his journeys, he gains followers, people who act as like partners or sidekicks to him, and who help him at different times throughout the story. Each of them has their own storyline to deal with Abel before he can like recruit them, but then they become like recurring characters. And it's a very colorful group. The what did I call them? The partners or sidekicks, followers. The followers that he gains are characters that are not just normal people. They're very, very interesting people or creatures. They're not all human, for one. He gets a dog, he gets a cat, he gets a ogre essentially. He does have a couple one or two humans or something follow him, but then he also has like a dog and a cat and stuff like that. And so it's far more than just like this group of humans that's following around this knight type thing. It's actually an interesting entourage that's less of an entourage and more of this magical menagerie of characters. Some of the most interesting like metaphysical aspects of this story are how Sir Abel travels through the realms, when it happens and why, and then the events that transpired during those trips. There's one scene that I remember that includes a tower, and it was just fascinating thinking about how all that affects things, and then it's more than just one little moment that it affects or one little piece of the story that it affects. It has a huge impact on what's going on and how interactions in the future take place and stuff like that. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff on that front. Just the way that he ascends and descends through these different realms is a very fascinating part of the story that's being told. But it also greatly affects the timeline of things, as depending on where you go, more or less time will pass. For Sir Abel, it isn't a problem because he's not affected, but the things around him are. And this is because he is the one that is doing the things, and so things are time is passing to him normally, whereas to other people it wouldn't. It's passing differently type thing. Events transpire that he is unaware of or unable to be a part of because he is gone. Also, the rules of the worlds change. So when you're in Mythgarther, that has different rules than I read it the whole time as Alfreys, but I don't think that's right. It's something more like Alfrice or something like that. I don't speak the language that these words come from, but it's something along those lines. And it's just one of the other realms. And there's things like that where the rules between Mythgarther and Alfrice are different. And I'm positive that I'm butchering those names, but maybe that's closer than whatever I was saying before. The more I think back on this book, the more things I have to say on it. Yesterday when I was writing this review, I was trying to think about it and I was like, man, but I remember this thing and I want to try and incorporate that into my review. But then as I was sitting there writing the review, I was like, I need to simplify what it is that I'm saying or mash it up together a little bit, because if I don't, this would be a very, very, very long review. There's just, and that's very strange for me. Most of the time I don't have a review, even of books that I love, I don't have a review that takes forever to get through. I can find a way to concisely say what I want to say about the book. And with this one, I was having a hard time doing that just because I kept thinking of more and more of the things that were going on and the way that the story was constructed and the events that were taking place, and just the character journeys, the character interactions that we were getting. It was just so much interesting stuff that I was remembering and looking back on. I was like, this is so cool. I want to talk about all of this, and I can't. I had to, even with what I have written in my for my outline here. It's longer than my outlines usually are. This is one of my longest outlines that I have, so I don't know how long it's going to be in video format, but for me as the writer of this review, it was a much longer review than I was expecting it to be. But there's things like meeting Michael the Archangel, or fighting dragons, or shape-shifting beings, elves, etc. There's so much to it all, and the story is just like a tapestry of colors and events. You never know where the story will go next. It is truly one of the most interesting and rewarding books I've read in a while, just on the pure storytelling aspect of it. Not to mention the digging deeper. It's just such a pleasure to read this one and then be able to discuss it with Liam and Shannon and Britton as we went. So those three channels, there are three guys who each have channels: Liam's Lyceum, Shannon's Shelf, and some Okie Dude. And we were just in a Discord group chat and messaging back and forth as we were reading the book and talking about it and mentioning things that we were coming across or seeing or whatever. It was just so interesting, so much fun to be able to read it with them and discuss it in that way. And I do think that helps because I'm able to now look back on those discussions and remember a little bit of what was going on. Even though I finished this in December. I read most of it in October, November, but then I had like 50 pages or something left of the night in December that I had to wrap up. But it was so enjoyable, and getting to buddy read it with those guys just really helped a lot with my enjoyment for sure. But even as I'm looking back, and as I was looking back and writing this review, I wasn't looking back at the discussions that we were having. I was looking back at the story itself and the moments that I remember and the events that happened, and the mental image that was created through these events. Like, I have these incredible images in my mind from this story, and it's just one of, like I mentioned earlier, one of the most rewarding books I've read in a while. I definitely highly recommend the book, even with its weird and sometimes a little bit disturbing or perverted scenes. And there were a couple of those, most of which I skimmed because I don't care. I didn't want to read them, but they were never too graphic for the most part, and you were able to avoid them, but they were there a little bit, and just the rest of the story surrounding it was so interesting to me, so good to me, that those moments weren't enough to diminish my enjoyment of the book. Looking back now as I write this review, my appreciation has only grown about this story. It's just my appreciation has grown deeper as I look back on the story in a way that sometimes doesn't happen with books. It happened. When did it happen? Obviously, Lord of the Rings. That's one that happens with, and Silmarillion and The Hobbit. But that's Tolkien, so I'm not surprised with that. I remember it specifically happening with Warbreaker from Brandon Sanderson, and the first time I read that, looking back on it after I finished it, I was like, man, I really appreciate this story and the things that were going on and the way that it was constructed. But during the reading of it, I didn't enjoy it as much. This one I enjoyed quite a bit during the reading of, but as I look back, I'm enjoying it even more. So anyways, that is my review of The Night. It's not going to be for everybody, but it was so enjoyable to me, the medieval aspects of it, and there's so much that I didn't touch on. I'll have to touch on more of it when I get to my review of The Wizard, because there's a lot of medieval, a lot of Arthurian and influences and stuff like that, and you just don't see them all until they don't become plain until you read The Wizard and can look back on what was happening in The Night. So there's just a lot of fantastic stuff, and I will leave it at there because I know this is getting long and I need to film 2 other videos yet today. So anyways, thank you guys for watching an Erudite Adventure. We post videos every Monday and Thursday and have our social medias linked in the description down below, and we will see you guys again soon. Stay warm.